I've gone over Symbaroum's abilities and mystical powers presented in the core rulebook. Now it's time to look at rituals. Despite taking up less space in the book, rituals are pretty text heavy and a little more complicated. Reading out the full text of each ritual had this video on pace to be an hour long, so as per usual, I'll just paraphrase the game effect as best I can and leave the text up so you can pause if you want to read it in full. While I think Symbaroum's abilities and mystical powers are better and worse, but overall decently balanced in A tier through C tier, I find rituals to be way more swingy, and for that, I'm adding an S tier and a D tier. I am still leaving out F tier because I don't think there are any abilities you should just never take. There will always be some roleplay scenario or some player fantasy that can draw you towards taking a certain ritual. Before we get to the ranking, we should talk about how rituals work. In order to learn a ritual, you will first need to pick up the Ritualist ability. At novice level, this allows you to learn one ritual, adept level adds two more for a total of three, and master level adds three more for a total of six possible rituals. The ability text also says you'll need to first have access to a ritual in order to learn and memorize it, which may come in the form of a tutor, a treasure, or a reward. This is something to be aware of and a minor caveat on the ability, but I think most tables will be able to work this out so that the game master provides opportunities for the ritualist player to find the rituals they want. It just takes a little communication. The description text for Ritualist gives us more insight to how Ritualist works. The character suffers one permanent corruption from each ritual it learns, unless the character is taking the appropriate mystical tradition ability. When performing a ritual, which takes at least an hour of in game time, the character suffers 1d4 temporary corruption, reduced to 1 temporary corruption if they have the right tradition. This setback is minor because temporary corruption goes away at the end of a scene, and almost all of the time you will be conducting a ritual in a safe place and taking a break before a combat scene with an active mystical powers that add more temporary corruption. When grading these rituals, I'll be looking at mechanics first and flavor far second. This will be more difficult to assess than abilities and mystical powers because almost all rituals are what roleplayers would refer to as utility rather than offense and defense powers that come with numbers that make them easier to objectively ascertain a power level for. When grading utility, I'm mostly going to consider the effect and how often you can use that effect. If something is applicable in every day of your adventure, no matter the situation, that's going higher. Something that only comes up once will go lower, but with Symbaroum's rituals, that's still not a bad thing. One well timed ritual in response to a dire situation can completely change your fate. It's just a matter of your campaign and your game master as to how likely that specific situation is to arise. I'll start with S tier so we can see how good rituals work in the game so we can better understand the ones that don't work. S tier rituals are always great and stack the odds significantly in your favor. A tier will definitely be a boon in most scenarios. B tier are generally reliable but may not have a dramatic effect. C tier are conditional with limited effects, and D tier are extremely limited in both effect and applicability. As with the other ranking videos, I am just one man, and my opinions are fallible and prone to blind spots, so I look forward to hearing corrections and agreements from veteran players in the comments. Now then, let's get to the ranking. I have three rituals in S tier, and while they represent different mystical traditions and accompanying flavor text, they all say essentially the same thing. Congratulations, you are now in possession of a second character. That second character may never be as powerful as you or other party members, and it shouldn't be, but it will still be present to deal damage, take hits intended for you, provide an extra body for flanking and barricades, carry equipment, check for traps, and do all of this completely under your control. These are major boons, and I'm a little shocked you can get it for only 10 XP and a little corruption. Flaming Servant is at the top of the list mostly for its novelty. Its base stat block boasts slightly higher damage and armor than the other two, but it does cost you extra thaler by having to provide a suit of armor. But while D&D and other games let you summon familiars and angelic souls, I don't think I've ever seen something like Symbaroum's Burning Myrmidon. It's cool, it's metal, it gets the top spot. I already covered why this is good when talking about Flaming Servant, and you may decide it's the number one pick for you instead of that ritual. Take your pick. Familiar gets my number 3 spot because of the need to be careful with its HP sharing. It's quite cool and something that the other two can't do. It can potentially save your life in a way that the others can't, but we can't ignore that if your familiar goes down in a combat scene, you are probably the next to go. But this soul bond has an endearing effect that fulfills the fantasy of having your own magical pet that is something even more special than your cat at home. Familiar gets my lowest spot on S tier, but only by a hair. Domination abilities in other role playing games are common, but rarely are they so unconditional and brutal. You control this being, and it is very hard for anyone to break that control. Enslave belongs to the sorcery tradition, which I previously commented is a villainous occupation mostly designed with NPCs in mind, and this sells it. This is an evil ability, no mistake. But while other sorcery powers may instantly light a big torch above you saying, "Look here, evil spellcaster coming through," Enslave also happens to be subtle. You can have one or multiple slaves from this ability, and if you play it right, no one will know the puppet master behind them. Magic Circle is a utility spell, but it is a crucial one for establishing the world, the magic order, and potentially your quest. Long range communication is a big deal in our history, an invention that changes a civilization with every leap forward. It will do the same for your game. Magic Circle opens up so many possibilities for the player and the game master, and its potential cannot be ignored. Possess is another domination ability available for sorcerers, which seems a little redundant, but there are some important differences. Enslave's control is absolute and doesn't require a roll like Possess, but once your slave is out in the world, you can't keep perfect track of them, nor can you issue updated commands until you check back in with them. Possess lets you completely take on the form of another, seeing through their eyes and controlling their actions with precision. The spell prevents you from having the subject commit suicide, but that doesn't stop you from issuing a command that would amount to a suicide by cop as you send them into danger against other creatures. Possess is a powerful ritual, one that will take some planning to pull off, but one that can be hyper utilized by devious players. Borrow Beast is a more gentle kind of possession which can be accessed by witches. You take control of an animal, and while you won't be using them to battle or having them ruin their reputation at the upcoming Ambrian Ball, this is an invaluable tool for scouting that I have regularly seen used and abused in D&D. Summoning is Borrow Beast's cousin. You won't be controlling this animal, but you can call them to your aid. The game master still has control over them, and there's no follow up text on what happens next after the animal gets to you, but that just leaves the story open for possibilities. Once again, scouting abilities are quite strong in the hands of a clever player overseen by a descriptive game master. Clairvoyance does have some important caveats that hold it back from being A tier, but it is still eminently useful and potentially life saving. Like long range communication, long range instant travel should be a big deal when it is introduced to your fantasy setting. Well, maybe not instant, it still takes an hour, but it sure beats walking. It's kind of a shame that Seven League Stride only lets you take one other creature with you. If it instead let you take your whole party, I could easily see it in A tier. Illusion effects are contentious to rank by power. They rely so much on what the player is able to imagine, and perhaps more rely on the game master's ability to let that imagination flourish. I happen to think it's an ability with a lot of potential, and Symbaroum's version doesn't have a lot of restrictions to it. Just like clairvoyance can help avoid a fight by seeing where an enemy is and planning around it, illusion can help you by planting a giant troll at the mouth of a cavern so the elves following your tracks think twice about following you. Weather is a big deal. Maybe not game changing, but certainly scene changing. This allows you to alter a battlefield in your favor, to bring prosperity to your little farm town or ruin to your rival's own, to alter the course of travel for your companions or your enemies. Once again, not a lot of defined benefit, but near endless possibilities. Speak with Dead has become an iconic D&D spell, and Symbaroum's version doesn't stray far from it. You'll be coming across a lot of dead things in Davokar and Ambria, and getting information from them, even in the form of yes or no answers, can alter the course of your party's journey. There's a unique caveat to this version in that the dead spirit could possess you if you play your cards wrong, but you really have to try hard to get to that point. It's a nice addition and not one that knocks the ritual down a tier. Similar to necromancy, not as universally reliable, but possibly more potent in effect. You aren't as likely to come across a burnt object as you are a corpse, but when you do, you can now see the full scene displayed before you, not just simple yes or no answers. This is a positively neat ritual for your wizard and a really cool tool for game masters. At the top of C tier, we have three abilities that reduce your permanent corruption. This won't matter to most characters, but it can be life saving to those who stumble on their mystic path and need to right themselves. Like with Flame Servant, my pick for the top spot of these three similar abilities comes down to which one I think has the coolest flavor, so your pick may vary. I adore the extra fluff text this ritual gives us. Like all things magical in Symbaroum, purging your permanent corruption will come at a cost. One experience point is a heavy toll, as is the possibility that your stone could explode. In past videos, I ranked healing abilities and powers highly, and while I'd like to do the same with these three rituals, their extra costs cannot be ignored, and that is why, despite their life saving effects, they are staying in C tier. While Soulstone is perhaps the most unique of the three purging rituals, I think purging fire is the most evocative. It perfectly fits in with the oeuvre of the Church of Prios. The cost here, aside from the XP, is direct damage, and while it looks like you can apply your armor to reduce that damage, you will still need to pass a resolute test each round to keep this ritual up. This sets up a dramatic scene for your Theurge, and I really like the way that heightens the ritual. Blood Bond was for me the obvious choice for the lesser of these three abilities. Not only does it require you to have a whole second ritual to perform, but that ritual is the one that gives you a cute little pet that you must now choose to harm to protect yourself. It's a good dramatic beat that sets up a scene similar to Purging Fire, but for many players, this will just seem too mean. Worse than mean is the possibility that your adorable companion could turn into a horrifying abomination, setting up an entirely different scene for your witch and their party. Blood Bond still gets the job done, but at what cost? I praised rituals like Illusion and Turn Weather for their potential to avoid a fight, and here's a ritual that is explicitly designed for you and your party to avoid a deadly encounter. Why so low? Because abominations are pretty limited as a creature subtype, and this ritual only targets one particular abomination, and only while your witch can keep singing. Undo buttons tend to be strong in role playing games, but in Symbaroum, I think they come up a little less often. Maybe if you're running a higher magic campaign that leans into sorcerers and enemy rituals, this could be B tier for its ability to outright end those effects with no questions asked. If I'm trying to picture the average Symbaroum experience based around the core books, and take that with a grain of salt because apparently the campaign books add a ton to the lore and possible scenarios you'll encounter, I think that Breaklink is very situational. Still worth taking though, C tier. Exorcism is similar to Breaklink by being an undo button, but it's a tad more situational. There are actually multiple ways multiple enemies can possibly possess you, so I'm not putting this lower, but I do think it belongs in C tier. Oracle is the first of four investigator type rituals in Symbaroum. They all seek to find answers around your adventure, and they're all very different in satisfying ways, but not so different for me to avoid lumping them all together here in mid C tier. Oracle gets the top spot because it is the most open with the least restrictions. Its power still relies on just how badly your game master wants to keep secrets or point you in the right direction, and because of this GM factor, I could see all of these rituals going up to B tier or falling down to D tier depending on your game master. When you get an answer from these abilities, they should be helpful, but you do have to choose your question carefully since you only get one chance per adventure. That's a low rate of use for your experience, but at the same time, this one question could define your game. Fortune telling offers a broad question that can only be answered with yes or no. That may seem severely limiting, but a straightforward short answer could be just as useful, if not more useful, than the cryptic long answer offered by Oracle. Results may vary, but for my pick, fortune telling gets the number 2 spot. Symbaroum's take on D&D's Zone of Truth does offer multiple attempts to be made questioning the same creature. It's not as easily utilized as oracle or fortune telling. You'll need a captive cultural being to make this work, and you'll have to hope they have low resolute so you can pass your resolute checks. But in the right scene, this could yield a lot of valuable information for your party. Like command confession, but telepathic interrogation allows you to be a little more sneaky as you quietly read the thoughts of your target. Sanctifying Rite is the first of 3 sanctuary type spells that create a safe zone for you and your allies. All of them help to hide you from prying eyes to some degree, and Sanctifying Rite gets the edge by also damaging abominations and undead that come near you. I don't have much to say about Sanctum, it gets the job done. Witch Circle doesn't grant as many magical protections as Sanctifying Rite and Sanctum, but could still be your top pick because of the cozy factor. If you have too many plants at home, post cottagecore to your Instagram, and always find yourself playing a druid in D&D, you're also going to want Witch Circle just because it lets you make a little safe space in nature for your character and their familiar to relax in and enjoy some herbal tea. Judging bonds is a ritual that is severely limited, but very good at what it does. This shuts off enemy casters, full stop. You'll have to get a hold of them first, and then use this hour-long ritual, but if capturing and subduing a mystic is what you have to do, then this is the ritual you need to take. False terrain could be like illusion, but in my experience with hallucinatory terrain in D&D, leads me to believe false terrain is just way more limited in what you can accomplish with it. This can still work, and just like illusion, it will depend on your creativity as a player and your game master's willingness to work with you, but I think the way the spell is written, a lot more could go wrong to reveal your trick and render this ritual redundant. Shadows are one of Symbaroum's most intriguing world building blocks, and I want to like them more. I think my frustration comes from the way the game makes you interact with them. The Witch Sight ability allows you to see shadows, but only if you pass a check and only with some corruption. Holy Smoke gets rid of the checks and gets straight to the point of showing you who or what is corrupted and to what degree, but it doesn't include the nice flavor of actually getting to witness a creature's shadow. Still, at least this is guaranteed to point you to what you want to know, and it's a neat trick for bounty hunter types. Quick Growth is another cozy ritual like Witch Circle with some possibly useful terrain altering effects. Unfortunately, there's just too many unnecessary caveats that make this ritual unreliable but not totally unusable. Oh, look, another weirdly limited ability related to shadows. Exchanging shadows with a creature can be cool, but it's based on the assumption that someone is after you and has the ability to see your shadow. Swapping your shadow is a good trick that will get them off your trail, at least if you can get the material components and pass the required die roll. Worse yet is that this ritual is restricted to sorcerers, meaning again, we are looking at something that's for villains first and players second. I want to like this, but Exchange Shadow just doesn't have the sauce. Heretic's Trail promises a glowing quest trail to your target, but winds up being very limited in practice. The limitation concerning water may be a more or less significant detriment in your game depending on how many creeks and swamps your game master feels like putting in Davokar, and you'll still have to roll to track down your foe. I want to like Heretic's Trail, but the longer I sit with it, the more frustrating it is. Give this one to a bounty hunter NPC and see if your party wants to hire him. Desecrating Rite establishes a protective zone, just like the three previously mentioned rituals I put in C tier. This one gets a D because it will actually attract danger to you. Are there some clever ways to work around this? Absolutely. You don't have to be a completely villainous party to set this up as a potential trap for your enemies, hiding in its magical protections and then leaving when the undead come in, and the Templars following you have to fight them before you spring from the bushes to end the Templars. But it's the kind of scenario that takes a lot of work rather than just getting straight to the benefit and being happy about it. Desecrating Right is here for the bad guys, and that's probably not your character. Now let's take a look at which traditions come out on top in regards to how they can utilize rituals. Coming in first is Wizardry. Witches got my top spot for mystical abilities, but wizards are masters of the long game, and I think that's fitting. They have access to the most rituals with 10. They have my pick for the best ritual in the game, plus a smattering of A through C tier rituals. I think wizards also have the broadest range of utility in the game, making them the perfect magical multi tool for your party. Witches come in a respectable second place with an S tier of their own, some Bs and Cs, and 1D. While not as varied in usefulness as the wizard's rituals, the witch abilities and rituals really do come together nicely to form the image of a nature shaman, and there's still enough variability for you to shape your witch to fit your unique idea for the character. Third place in rituals is the Theurge with 7 C tier rituals, 1 S tier, and 1D. The Theurges are still very useful at laying down rituals, but you'll just have to be a little more careful at picking and choosing the right ones for your particular campaign. The righteous flavor of the sun god is still on point. Last place once again goes to sorcery. Sorcerers only have access to 4 rituals, and 2 of those are D tier. Poor bad guys can't get a leg up in this dark fantasy world. But of course, there is self taught mystic. You can mix and match different rituals for a little extra corruption, though it's worth pointing out that this might not be as necessary since a lot of rituals have functional counterparts that are just of a different tradition. And that's going to do it for this video. Next up is a look at boons and burdens. See you there, Symbaroum fans. Have a nat one day. Bye bye.